Learning is experience. And so if we're talking about all of that, we have a framework for thinking about value creation. So you remember my point about compositional change? Industrial, agriculture? Well, what if learning becomes the main source of value creation? And we actually can account and create accounting systems that take into account learning. We've done stranger things, though. We've done stranger things with human systems for thinking about that. So here's your task. I'm done. So your task, now you have to go out and work. Individual generation of a set of descriptive elements of a learning-intensive society. Roundtable presentation. Discussion of a composite picture. Put up the post-it notes. So you already did this morning. Analyze the rich picture of an operational working learning-intensive society using a 4-layered analytical framework. And your facilitators will walk you through this. They're all familiar with this. It's called the causal layer analysis framework, and it's a way of making sense of it. So here's the picture. We have a little bit of time this afternoon. My feeling is you should do some post-it notes, play with the learning-intensive society. The learning-intensive society is always more interesting the next day. The learning-intensive society takes, like, what are you talking about? It's a bit crazy, I don't get it, there's too many concepts. But that's part of the idea. It's a bit of a way of pushing people outside of their box. And tomorrow morning, we'll try and put together a version of North Africa, water, and urban development in 2045, 2050, 2060, it doesn't matter. And try and break it down according to these categories. Two last things. So here are the categories. The categories are the headlines. What do people talk about at a cafe? What are the newspaper headlines, right? So yesterday, the first Murmuration urban collective took off yesterday, something like that. Where the newspaper announces something specific that's very different. The kind of property rights for people's credit were decentralized, so that people could establish their own currency. Can you imagine what the central bank would think of that? So the headline was, yesterday a new law was passed, and now everybody can produce their own currency. I mean, that's the kind of thing of the headline. The system would be, well, the economic system has gone peer-to-peer like crazy, right? So I don't know how many of you have heard of something called the blockchain. Bitcoin. The blockchain is the second innovation after public key cryptography that's going to probably empower a decentralization of contracting. Now, decentralization of contracting might sound like something sort of esoteric, but you need to remember that the mercantilist era, that was the precursor to the capitalist era, was founded on two rather modest innovations: double entry bookkeeping and bills of exchange. In other words, when you change the basis for contracting, which is a temporal concept, a contract, things start to open up. So we've got a really interesting set of things happening, which could create the peer-to-peer economy. Point of view is how do different stakeholders see this. And then the metaphor is, well, the murmuration is the one I already gave you. So that's the one I've given you, murmuration. But you have to come up with your own. You have to dream up your own metaphor that describes the picture you've drawn. It could be, Everest, it could be jungle, it could be lots of people use different ones that pick up on different aspects of the natural world, which is normal because we're doing a lot of biomimicry these days. We're picking up on aspects of the world around us from a natural perspective. But I'll leave that up to you, and in case you'll have a chance to rest a little bit. As I said, this is the hard part of the learning curve. This is not the easy part. Inventing a model is hard. It's hard when you're in university. It's hard when you're doing it on the street. So this is a chance to play with models. Let me just say one last thing about time and temporality. From my perspective, if I try and think of this in terms of complexity, it doesn't matter if it's 1 year, 2 days, 10 years, or 100 years. Significant paradigmatic change can happen at any moment. And the tipping point for a paradigmatic shift is completely unpredictable. And we don't even know which paradigm we're talking about, because it's a new paradigm. So don't get hung up about how long, how realistic, how likely. We're not in doing prediction here. And we're not doing, is this good? Do I like it? That's not what this is about. It's about, can I play with the models in my mind? And can I invent some new models? So I was giving you an example. It's not meant to be, in stone. It's meant to try and give you an indicator of how you can begin to create your own model. So that's it. Yeah.
I mean, since the morning and now with what we've heard from you, I don't know. I mean, predicting a model. Aren't we seeing ourselves now that we are getting into worldwide, into that new model already? In terms of, let me try to elaborate on that, because you mentioned a number of times indicators, you mentioned accounting, and as we all know, we're following a default system of accounting, which is not, gearing us towards the right.
Absolutely.
And we have found out since and even before the 2008 crisis, that we're not on the right track on both the social, economic, and environmental fronts, 3 fronts. So in other words, the world has been pursuing a flawed economic model. Now, even with all the good intentions of what's going on in the climate change negotiations, it's clear that even if what is being reflected in the NDCs is going to be implemented, we're not going to reach the ultimate goal. So we are heading into a crisis. And unfortunately, working at UNEP for such a long time, it's been clear to me that we're always, as human beings, always reactive. We're not. Once you get into a crisis, you start dealing with it. Whether it's the ozone layer, the biodiversity loss, desertification. So we've always been, as humans, unfortunately, maybe, I don't know, is that nature or what, but always been responsive and not proactive. And we see ourselves heading into, dead end, and yet we're not serious. And even, you see, in spite of all the pronouncements in international fora, conventions, commitments, political commitments, but what's really going on is the opposite direction. Forced by politicians, by personal agendas, by transnational corporations, name it. So unless really we change course, or are we waiting until we're heading into this collision and then we start trying to deal with the situation, or what? I'm not sure. I mean, and that's why when this whole issue of green economy came about, and I see this is the only way out, frankly speaking, at least from my own personal point of view, that we have, it's like back to origin. We're going back to nature. We're going back to cycling, we're going to keep the core in the ground, building with local material, which is the old way of living, which is the healthier way of doing things. Because it's not the material gains that is driving us to where human welfare is. That human welfare? We're not reaching human welfare. So maybe that's the I don't know. I mean, that's the way we should really go. It's greening our economies, going back to our origins. Encourage, I mean, you mentioned it since the morning, I mean, empowering local communities, local people, where are the youth, women, marginalized communities? We cannot live like this. I mean, the gap between the rich and poor, between countries and within countries is increasing. We're damaging our environment, we're damaging our resources, living unhealthy life. I mean, we claim that we're happy, but I'm not sure. I mean, who are we? 5%. 0.005% of the total population, or what? I mean, I thought I should share this with you because
absolutely,
because maybe we need to think. I mean, and this is from groups like this. We maybe can, in a little way, make a dent. Coming from here as sort of recommendations or whatever. that we need to shift gears seriously, and we need really